Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. So I pulled out this kit out of the stash, and let's see if we can get it into primer over a weekend. Friday night pre-build. I pulled the frames from the box and read through the instructions. There are only 10 steps, but that interior still needs some paint and decals. I decided to paint as much as I could on the frames with the US interior green. This is an American aircraft in the finished service. Day one, here we go. The only set of decals for a finished version of this P-38 or H-75 are for CU-502, which would have been a mid-1941 variant obtained from Germany via France or Norway. We'll see what I end up doing once we get to the painting stage. Cockpit details were painted and decals were added to the instrument panel. The building starts with the radial engine and cockpit buildup. Right here from the start, I see my plans to get this little warbird in the primer in one day may not be realistic. There are tons of flash and mold lines that need to be cleaned up all throughout this kit. That is going to slow this build down tremendously. I do like the indicators on parts that have a specific directional orientation. Here's one for the cockpit floor, and there's another one on the firewall that I didn't take a picture of. Also, I forgot about the seatbelt decals, so I added them now, and while they dried, I put the firewall and radial engine in place. Dry fitting the port side of the fuselage showed that the fit was going to have issues. Not much could be done about it. Just know that this kit isn't the clean build I'd hoped for. Honestly, if I was to do this plane again, I would glue the floor and back walls in separately and get a better fit at the back of the cockpit. Lots of lessons learned for this particular model. The rear wheel has a small deck that needs to be glued in place. The cockpit was finally dry and assembled, so that went in with the help of some molded shelves into the side of the fuselage. The wings are in three parts, with caps for the internal wheel wells, not so much for the details, but at least it's not open to the top surface, interior surface of the wings. There are still lots of flash to clean up, and getting the top side wings to mate up with the bottom side cleanly was a struggle. Between the mold lines, the flash, and the alignment issues because of the wheel well caps, I have no hope of not using a ton of putty on this model. In the end, I bolted them together and figured I would fix, like I said, any gaps with filler. Here, once again, the mold for this kit is showing its age with more flash. A sharp blade took care of where the front cowling meets the body. Now comes the real struggle, mating the two fuselage halves together. Nothing really seemed to fit well, but the worst of it was the front cowling. So now I see why other kits, newer kits, will often mold the cowling separately for radial engines. If I had to do this again, I would sand off the locator shelves and push the engine a little bit further back into the airplane, see if that helps with the seam. Anyway, I decided the ugly seam would just have to be filled and sanded. It's going to be ugly no matter what I do, as I don't have the skills to fix a defect that bad, but we'll see what the primer shows. I added the wings and taped them in place while the glue set. After a dinner break, I came back and taped off the top front seam and added some sprue goo made from styrene molding frames and a little Tamiya cement. So I set the whole model down and called it a day. Day two, the next morning. I started my Sunday morning build by removing the gap tape and examining the fill. The gap is gone, but it's still an ugly seam. I decided to add the rudder. Once again, poor body alignment didn't help. It looked like some big gaps. With a sharp blade and some light sanding, I finally got it to sit in place with enough contact points to actually be able to glue the rudder to the back of the tail. The horizontal stabilizers were the same story, with the slot tabs being oversized or the hole for the tabs being undersized. I'm not sure which. So I started by sanding and test fitting several times so I could get them to fit correctly. Even then, I just had to open the slot up a little bit as the tabs were getting too thin for my liking. I was afraid I'd snap them off. With everything in place, it's putty time. Lots of putty. I like using acrylic putty. You just get to push it into place, give it 5 minutes to set up, and come back with a damp cotton swab and remove any excess, leaving a nice clean fill. The clear parts were crisp, surprisingly, and I snapped the mask up. I gave them a quick shot of olive green, and they will be ready to add to the plane after the painting is all completed. Time to get the small bits associated with the landing gear cut and cleaned up. And again, it took a lot of sanding and cutting to get rid of all the flash, but I also covered all the parts that are already painted, and they were ready for primer. Feels like there isn't much happening on day 2, but it was a day filled with filling, sanding, refilling, resanding, filling, and sanding again. After I got everything sanded and fitted and glued, and I was happy, relatively speaking, I just came back and gave everything a cover of light gray primer. And so now I just need to leave all the parts to cure and think about that paint job, which we'll leave for the next video. And until then, happy modeling.